Ever heard of the Labor Day hurricane of 1935?
Can't say I have. Is it some kind of forgotten holiday?
No, no, nothing like that. It's actually a pretty stark reminder of just how powerful Atlantic hurricanes can be.
Oh,
Yeah, this one, for instance, wiped out an entire island's worth of buildings. Just gone.
wow. Okay, so that's the kind of power we're talking about today then.
Exactly. We're diving into the world of Atlantic hurricanes. We've got your Wikipedia article right here, ready to break down all the essentials about these weather titans.
Sounds good. I'm ready to dive in.
Perfect. So let's start with the basics. What exactly is an Atlantic hurricane?
The million-dollar question.
Well, according to this article, it's a type of tropical cyclone, those swirling vortexes of, well, wind and rain that form in the Atlantic basin.
Right.
And they usually show up between June and November hurricane season, though I guess as we'll get into later, not always.
Interesting. Now, you said tropical cyclone. Does that mean?
Oh, you're probably thinking, what's the difference between a hurricane, a typhoon, and a cyclone? And it's a fair question. Those terms get tossed around a lot.
Yeah, it's easy to get them confused. Like, are they all the same thing?
They are. Essentially, yeah. It all comes down to location, location, location. It's like calling a burger a patty melt. Same thing, just depends where you are.
Huh. Never thought about it like that. So a hurricane in the Atlantic is a typhoon in, say, the Pacific.
You got it.
It's fascinating how a single weather phenomenon can have such different cultural interpretations and names. For instance, the word hurricane actually comes from the Caribbean's Taino people. They believed in a god of evil, Huracan, and the name stuck to these storms, showing just how much they impacted their lives.
It's incredible. It's like these storms were so powerful, they became synonymous with this destructive force.
Exactly. Their impact resonated throughout history.
And speaking of history, for the longest time, we only used female names for hurricanes. Can you believe that?
Really? I had no idea. Thankfully, we joined the 20th century in 1979 and started using both male and female names.
Right. It was about time. But I'm curious, there's got to be a system for choosing these names. It can't just be random, right?
Absolutely not. Remember, hurricanes are just one type of tropical cyclone, and these storms can spin up all over the globe. So that naming system ensures meteorologists from different countries can clearly communicate about and track these storms, as they cross those invisible lines we draw on a map. Makes it a lot easier than saying, that big storm over there.
Right. Makes total sense. And speaking of names, we can't forget the practice of retiring them, like Hurricane Katrina, a name that still sends chills down your spine. Why do we do that?
Yeah, that one's hard to forget. Well, retiring a hurricane's name is reserved for the storms that cause, just catastrophic damage or really tragic loss of life.
Right.
It's a way of acknowledging the impact these events have on us, on history. I mean, can you imagine another Hurricane Katrina? It would be incredibly insensitive to the immense suffering caused by the 2005 storm.
Yeah. It'd be like trying to replace a piece of history, and not in a good way.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered the what and the who of hurricanes. Let's talk when hurricane season. Your article goes into some interesting details about this, breaking it down month by month.
Oh, this is interesting stuff. I'm always curious about the timing of these things.
So June, for example,
Yeah.
typically pretty quiet, like the calm before the storm, literally. Then July rolls around, things start to, heat up a bit.
Makes sense.
But then September. September is when hurricane activity really kicks into overdrive.
Peak season.
Exactly. What's so special about September? Is it just bad luck?
I wouldn't say bad luck, more like, well, good timing, at least from a hurricane's perspective, that is. Remember those key ingredients we talked about earlier?
Yeah.
Low pressure systems, warm ocean water, and that spinning Coriolis effect.
Yeah.
September is when all of those factors just align perfectly in the Atlantic. The ocean is at its warmest, which is like adding fuel to the fire for these storms. And the atmosphere, it's primed for those iconic swirling winds.
So it's like Mother Nature's got this recipe for some intense weather. And September is when she's got all the ingredients prepped and ready to go.
That's a great way to put it.
And here's where it gets interesting. Just when you think it's safe to let your guard down, hurricane season is winding down. We have these things called off-season hurricanes. Your article mentions a hurricane slamming into the East Coast on New Year's Day.
On New Year's Day?
Yeah, back in 1938. Talk about start of the year with a bang.
Wow, that's wild. It really throws a wrench into our neat little categories, doesn't it?
Right.
Like, it reminds us that Mother Nature doesn't always stick to our calendar.
It's true. And these off-season hurricanes, they're especially concerning because people might not be as prepared, It's like hurricane season is over, we can relax, and then bam.
Exactly. They're not expecting it.
Exactly. It's a good reminder to stay vigilant, even when we think we're in the clear. Speaking of vigilance, let's talk about those hurricane categories.
The calm before the storm.
Well, more like the categories during the storm.
Right, of course.
And no, this isn't like picking your favorite Netflix genre.
Haha, definitely not.
We're talking about the Saffir-Simpson scale, that system we use to measure our hurricane's intensity. It's more than just wind speed, though, right?
Oh, absolutely. The Saffir-Simpson scale, it ranges from Category 1 all the way up to a, well, pretty terrifying Category 5.
Right. And each category helps us understand the potential damage a hurricane can inflict.
Exactly. It gives us a sense of the impact.
So, for example, a Category 3 hurricane is usually when you see those mandatory evacuation orders being issued.
Right. That's when things start to get really serious.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
You mentioned damage, and there's one hurricane hazard that always makes me nervous: storm surge. It's like this monstrous wall of water just crashing inland.
Yeah, storm surge is nothing to mess with.
Your article talks about Hurricane Opal, a Category 4 storm that really changed how we view these categories in relation to storm surge.
Hurricane Opal, right. It showed us that even a Category 4 can generate a storm surge comparable to some Category 5s, devastating coastal flooding.
It's like the category doesn't always tell the whole story.
Exactly. There are other factors at play.
Definitely. It's a bit unsettling to think that even a lower category storm can pack that kind of a punch. What causes these storm surges anyway?
Well, essentially, as the hurricane's winds spiral towards the center, they push the water towards the coast.
Right. It's like they're gathering all that water up.
Exactly. And that, combined with the low atmospheric pressure at the hurricane center, which allows the sea level to rise, creates this surge that can inundate coastal areas, sometimes for miles inland.
And that's only going to get worse with rising sea levels.
Unfortunately, yes. It's a major concern.
It's a sobering thought for sure. And speaking of factors that could worsen these hurricane impacts, we have to address the elephant in the room: climate change.
Right. The big question.
The article doesn't go too deep into this, but it does mention that climate change could be influencing hurricane intensity and frequency.
It's a complex issue for sure, and scientists are still working to fully understand it.
Of course, it's not like there's an easy answer.
No, not at all. It's not just about whether we'll see more hurricanes, but whether those hurricanes will be more intense, with higher wind speeds, heavier rainfall, things like that.
Right. It's like trying to predict the behavior of a wild animal.
Exactly.
We have some understanding of their patterns, but there's always that element of unpredictability.
Absolutely. And with hurricanes, that unpredictability can have huge consequences.
Exactly. So how does climate change actually impact hurricanes? It's like trying to solve this giant swirling puzzle, but with much higher stakes.
You got it, high stakes indeed. One of the main ways climate change is thought to impact hurricanes is through warmer ocean temperatures.
Makes sense. Hurricanes like warm water, right?
Exactly. Think of it like this: hurricanes are fueled by that heat energy from the ocean's surface. So as the ocean warms due to climate change, it's like we're adding fuel to the fire.
More fuel, bigger fire.
Precisely. And potentially leading to more intense storms as a result.
Right, that makes sense. But it's not just about intensity, is it? There's also the question of how often these storms form and where they pop up.
You're absolutely right. When we talk about climate change and hurricanes, we have to consider frequency too, and location.
And are we seeing more hurricanes because of climate change?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. The relationship between climate change and hurricane frequency is still being studied. Some research suggests we might actually see fewer hurricanes overall.
Fewer, really.
And this is a higher proportion of those hurricanes could be major ones. Think Category 3 storms or higher.
Oh, wow. So fewer storms overall, but the ones that do form pack a bigger punch.
That's the idea, at least according to some of the research. And then there's the location aspect. Warmer ocean temperatures could expand the areas where hurricanes can form, potentially putting coastal communities that haven't really experienced these storms before at risk.
Wow. So it's like a whole mix of potential impacts, each one more unsettling than the last. We've covered a lot of ground here, from the nuts and bolts of what makes an Atlantic hurricane to this looming threat of climate change.
It's a lot to take in.
It really is. But I think it brings us to a really important question, and maybe the biggest takeaway for our listeners. Why does all of this matter?
That's the heart of it, isn't it? Understanding Atlantic hurricanes, it's not just about memorizing a bunch of facts or knowing when hurricane season starts. It's about empowering yourself with knowledge that can actually make a difference.
Right, it's about staying safe.
Exactly. Knowing when hurricane season is, understanding those categories and what kind of risks they bring, being aware of hazards like storm surge, this knowledge, it equips you to make informed decisions for yourself, for your loved ones. It's about knowing when to prepare, when to evacuate if you need to, how to stay safe during a storm.
It's about being prepared, not scared.
I love that. Prepared, not scared. And I think even beyond that personal level of preparedness, understanding hurricanes, especially in the context of a changing climate,
Yeah.
it helps us appreciate the sheer power of these storms and the importance of, respecting our planet.
It's a good reminder that we're not just observers in all of this. Our actions have a very real impact.
They do. And those impacts, they can turn into tidal waves, literally, when we're talking about hurricanes.
Very true. Well, on that note, is there anything that stood out to you during this deep dive? Anything in the article that surprised you?
I have to say, the whole concept of off-season hurricanes was new for me. I mean, it's one thing to be prepared during hurricane season, but those rogue storms popping up outside those traditional time frames, that's a whole other level of, well,
Uncertainty.
exactly, uncertainty. Like, Mother Nature doesn't always follow our calendar.
And with climate change adding another layer of, well, complexity to all of this.
Right. It makes you wonder, what if those exceptions to the rules, those off-season hurricanes, what if they become more like the rule?
That's something to think about. To our listeners, we hope this has been a helpful crash course on Atlantic hurricanes, drawn straight from your Wikipedia article. But remember, this is just the tip of the iceberg.
There's so much more to learn.
Absolutely. We encourage you to keep exploring, keep asking those questions, and keep learning about the incredible, powerful, and sometimes unpredictable world we live in. Because a little knowledge can go a long way.